ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you in our discussion regarding the Russian assertiveness. And it's my pleasure to introduce you our distinguished guests, and I think that we have really interesting panelists. The first I would like to introduce Tinatin Khidasheli, the former Minister of Defense of Georgia. There's Jaroslav Bžoch, member of Czech Parliament, the Vice Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Greta Monika Tučkutė from Lithuania, advisor to the Minister of Defense. Andrey Pivovarov, the Chairman of Open Russia organization. Jan Šír from the Charles University, Faculty of Social Sciences. And last but not least, Jonáš Syrovátka from the Prague Security Studies Institute, who worked on a program of the Czech elections in the age of disinformation. And so we have 2 hours, so I think that we will start with the question, because the topic is very broad, and we spoke with the other panelists before, that actually lots of things can be covered by this term. So I would like to ask our guests what does it mean for them, how they experienced it. So it means that we should start with Mrs. Khidasheli, because the Georgians have enormous personal experience with the Russian influence over their own country. So, Tinatin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for having me here. Yeah, unfortunately that is true. We have an enormous experience with dealing with Russian influences, and not only influences, unfortunately, much more than just influences. This discussion is called Russian assertiveness, and I think that this is exactly one of the biggest problems or troubles in today's world political agenda. I don't know whether Russian Kremlin is so self-confident and so sure about its actions all over the world, not just in Georgia, obviously, and it's not, unfortunately, limited only to Georgia, but to the rest of the world as well. But the most important, as I was told when I entered the university in the very first class, it's more about the politics, it's more about the assumptions rather than actually what is going on and how things are run. And the assumption all over the world, I believe today, is that Russia is in charge of the world order today. They are acting, they are doing whatever is on their mind, and the rest of the world is on a responsive mode and basically reacting to the actions and activities of Kremlin throughout the continents and throughout the countries, being those members of NATO, members of European Union, and obviously outside the borders of NATO and European Union. I think this level of self-confidence of Mr. Putin himself and the Kremlin at large is one of the most important distinctive factors from the rest of the leadership in today's world. We do not see that kind of leadership on the other side of the world. We do not see the leaders who are as assertive, as self-confident, as clear in their messages and their actions towards Kremlin. Yes, there are sanctions, yes, there are policies at place, yes, there are lots of conferences, forums held discussing the issue, debating the issue, having lots of different documents. issued, but unfortunately problems stay, and they are much bigger now than they were 10 years ago when Russia last time intervened in Georgia and started war on the territory of Georgia, throughout Ukraine and then Syria, and today we have even bigger scandals already within NATO member states on cyber attacks, and you all know the UK case and lots of other cases that we can mention and give a long list here. So I believe that what we are lacking in today's world is exactly, as I'm trying to go around this world all the time, is exactly the assertiveness on the other side of the democratic world. Liberal democracies are failing one after another towards being proactive, being self-confident, and having strong voice coming together against the deeds of the Russian Federation and President Putin himself. Obviously, I don't have a cure for that. I don't know what is it that then there is a magic stick that someone can use, and next morning we will wake up in a different world. Obviously, I know, I understand it doesn't happen like that, but at the same time, I think there are some formulas. If there was a courage, necessary courage among the European and US leadership that could change and make Russia face the reality of current times and bring Western democracies in charge of the world politics again, as from the response mode to the proactive and active mode. I will read it for my introduction.
Okay, thank you. Lithuania obviously is also the country with the border with Russia. So my question to Greta is, as an advisor to the Minister of Defense, what do you advise to the Minister how to counter such assertiveness?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for having me here as well. Yes, to give you the advice to this kind of question, it's easy from one side, but also very complicated. It's easy because we are protecting the eastern border of NATO. We are there, and we would be the first ones who would have some damage done, who would feel the damage done. And we had last year the Zapad exercises, military exercises, which demonstrated that Russian capabilities are high. We have experience, bad experience, which shows that Russia is ready to cross any of the red lines. First of all, they crossed the red line in Georgia in 2008. After they crossed the red line in Crimea in Ukraine, they are crossing still in Crimea, Ukraine. They are crossing the lines in Syria, and they are using also some unconventional measures like information, disinformation, energy measures, all kinds of unconventional things which can be contributing to their influence expansion. So yes, it's very complicated, and they are kind of knowledgeable of doing this. Kremlin is kind of using well the tools, except of some failures which we had recently with, for instance, Skripal case, where I can see that they were not really very well managing the issue and were giving some evidences, or the Netherlands case where they some spying and intelligence network has been exposed just because of some very technical mistakes. But nevertheless, what we have to do from our side, it's cash capabilities and contributions. I mean, we have to devote the the cash that we are spending for our defense, because nobody is going to defend us if we do not defend ourselves by ourselves. So what we are doing in our country, we are increasing the budget, and this year we are already going to have 2% of the GDP, which we are going to devote to the defense expenditure. And what we are doing with our budget is that we are investing in the capabilities and increasing the capabilities by investing into the new defense systems, new better equipment, and trying also to increase the resilience of our population by, for instance, renewing the conscription process. So this is another aspect which is helping for the people and for the society to understand that they have to protect and how to protect themselves. And contributions, it's also what is important, because if you are belonging to the alliance, it's important that you contribute equally to all possible priorities. And that's why for us it's important to show that we are also an equal partner, an equal ally who is ready to stand for their partners. What else should be done also is that, of course, the neighborhood countries and neighborhood policy should not be forgotten, and we are always standing and supporting our neighbors like Ukraine and Georgia, saying that we see them as also as important partners, and we would envision them also participating as equal partners in the alliances, although it's kind of complicated with the given political and geopolitical situation, as you may know. And yes, I absolutely agree that what is with Russia, the most complicated is that the West is always reacting but not proactively acting towards the Russian actions. And the strategies that we are developing, they are going afterwards, like a reaction towards something, but not like a proactive and innovative way of thinking. From one side, it's because of the complicated democratic process and many opinions and interests which are going from the north to the south, from the east to the west. And from the other side, it's of course the decision-making process, which is much more easy in Kremlin, clearly because of the whole vertical of the government. On the other hand, this is what is also uniting us, that the countries are equal in saying what they want to say, and equal in passing their messages and their needs and their inquiries. So that's why everybody's voices are being heard, and this is what helps us to stick together. So the recipe for the moment cannot be, as was previously very clearly noted, that the recipe cannot be found that easily. But still, I think a lot of things depend on the countries themselves individually. Because if you do not invest into yourself, if you do not try to defend yourself, it's very hard for the allies to say that, okay, we are going to defend you, and although you are not ready to do it for yourself. As I am now in Prague, in Czech Republic, I would also like to say that NATO is developing also some of the measures which are very important deterrence measures, like enhanced forward presence, which is being deployed in Baltic countries and Poland, and where, for instance, Czech Republic is also taking part, participating, and we have now 250 Ukrainian soil in this battalion group, which is ready also to contribute to the deterrence of this region. So we are very grateful to your people that you are taking part, and this is what it means by saying contribution. It means that all the countries are trying to contribute to the common goals and common threats of the alliance. So perhaps that's the starting remarks.
So we have some technical issues, so we have to pass one microphone. Actually, thank you, Greta, very much, especially for reminding me that I probably should apologize for using the word, Russia in a common term, and the term Kremlin is probably much better because Russia, fortunately, is not the completely authoritarian state as let's say North Korea, and so it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Andrey Pivovarov, who represents these Russians who are not fans, let's say, of Vladimir Putin. So I would like to use your insight into the inner working of the Russian politics and decision making. Could you provide us with some remarks on how this assertiveness is fulfilling, how does it really work? Because it's not just probably that someone, somewhere in the Kremlin, who is such a genius, there's a huge big plan and everything is going according to it, but its situation is much more fluid. So,
thank you very much. I'm a chairman of the Russia movement. We was established 3 years ago and have about 34 departments in almost all of Russia, from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. But first of all, I'd like to start from definition. Most of us talk about the Russian politics. I think it's not true. We speak about Putin politics. We have a lot of Russians who like to have a good relationships with Lithuania, Georgia, Ukraine, and other countries. Most of Russians like to be European country, and it's idea who is supported by most of my citizens of my country. So if you talk about Russian politics, it means Russian politics. And in my point of view, when we speak about defense, it's easy way to have a defense, to have a normal democracy in Russia, have a normal Russian young politics. We have these guys in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and any other regions who like to live in new modern Russia. Of course, we have a main problem with with authorities of Putin, but we hope that maybe it's like not a joke, but it's the best battalion for defense of Europe is a battalion of new Russian politics with a European modern mind. I think it's the best defense for any democracy. And I'd like to speak about Russian influence impact in European politics, USA politics, and African politics. It's difficult to speak about this when you live in Russia and see only some variants inside of Russia, but I'd like to speak about the 3 parts. First of all, everybody speaks about that Russian had involved in American election. I don't agree with this. So, because of not so much power, not so much money was spent for this campaign, and everybody speaks about it, but usually it's maybe like a myth. But in reality, it's not so strong. Of course, we have a special center, we have a special propaganda for the America, for Europe, for other countries. The guys, I'm from St. Petersburg, and we have a special center in our city who works like, it means, we don't know in English, trolls, we have the same, yes, and they work for any languages, not most of the languages. They try to create some fake news, false false accounts, and they like to involve in what impact in your politics. Of course, it's practice we have a big problem, and we have a lot of information about this center, and I think it's a problem of Russian propaganda in Europe and in USA. And I'd like to speak, so in my point of view, we have not so much involved in American election. But the situation, in my point of view, in Europe, of course, our authorities, Putin's propaganda, like to work with your politician, try to work with your marginal group. And in my point of view, the increase of populism, increase of chauvinism, increase of some radical marginals movement, this marginals movement helped by our authorities. I think the main idea of Russian authorities is that if you have a problem in your countries, it will easy way to support to stay Russian authorities in our countries. And the third part is nobody speak about it, but it's very important that Russian authorities now hardly work in Africa. Of course, we have some army, not Russian army, but private army in several countries in in Africa. And now we have one more practice that some Russian specialists in politics, some Russian, not called in English, it's called political consultants, yes, work here. It's a big practice, so it's a lot of guys work in Côte d'Ivoire, Sudan, Tsar, Madagascar. So those guys from Russia, from Moscow, from St. Petersburg go here and work with regimes and help him. So I think it's all of them. It's show us that Russian authorities like to have impact in this in several areas. And my idea is that the problem of Russia is that we have authorities in our country. If we create some changes in our country, it helps to support democratic institute in Europe, in Africa, and America, anywhere. So we have to start from Russia.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I understand that the role of a politician in such a discussion is quite often just being a scapegoat for all the deeds of a politician as a whole. So I'm especially glad that Mr. Jaroslav Bžoch came to us, and so I would like to, I hope that we are not going to give him some hard times for something he didn't do.
Elections already on.
Yeah, but so the main question is what you as a politician, as a vice chairman of the Foreign Policy Committee, you see that you as a parliamentarian should and could do in that regard.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's quite a hard question, to be honest. I don't have that much experience as a colleague sitting beside me, because when the Russians finally left our country, I was only 6 years old, and we talking about assertiveness, we can see that they had those assertivity like lots of years ago, and they still have it, but they are now using different tools. We already talked about it. At the time when they occupied our country, we didn't have those fake news, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitters, we didn't have those even fake media. So now it's a little bit easier for them, because new tools and the world is in a different order right now. I'm a vice chair of a committee on foreign affairs, and what we are talking in politics about Russia. Yes, we are focusing on what's happening around. We are focusing on what happened in Netherlands when the obviously agents for the GRU tried to even hack the system of Olympic anti-doping agency. Obviously, when you can't represent your country because of doping. We can also, we were focusing on what happened with Skripal, and the problem is, as I see it, that even when we are doing what we have done also in Czech Republic, that we dismissed three Russian diplomats, let's say diplomats, and we are doing those, and we are still keeping and continuing with any sanctions and stuff like that. The problem I see that the Russians don't care. Like we can see in the, for example, in Skripal, when anyone came out with the proofs would lead to three agents from Jaru, and there was the proofs that they managed, they did it, they failed, and what we have seen from Russian, it was just honestly, it was just like a comedy, and it was like, no, it's not true, it never happened. So the problem I see that Russian is acting really as we can do everything and we don't care what you think. That's a problem that I see. What I'm saying, yes, there still should be discussion. We have to talk to Russia because it's a big country. We have to try to focus on our politics, and we have to deal with it. Sanctions on the one hand could be a good tool how to force any country to, let's say, behave better, but it's not. It's worthless when it doesn't make it. It doesn't have any directions of what obviously happened with Russia. The other problem is that we are still having any seminars in our parliament about fake news. But the hard part is who at the moment is deciding what is fake news. How anyone can say what the hell is fake news, because it's all around, and we can have fake news even from other countries than just Russia. So yeah, in politics we must keep on dialogues, and we must have those dialogues between those countries and trying to focus on that. But what I can do as a parliamentarian or vice chair, as I said, it's all about dialogues. But these days it's really hard, and to be honest, after those few days of what has everything happened with Russia, it's really hard to say how we should act right now. So it's fun.
Thank you. And the next, let's say, I would like to hear some academic opinion, and so I give the floor to Jaroslav Bžoch from the Charles University, the senior analyst and long-time observer of the politics in not just Russia, but all the ex-Soviet republics. He recently published a very interesting book on Ukraine, so I would like to ask him what he views as the most important and probably the most dangerous part of the problem we are talking about.
Thank you, Andrey. Thanks for having me here. Well, we are talking about Russian assertiveness. I'm not sure whether the main problem is Russian assertiveness. I think the main problem is Russia's aggressiveness, irresponsible, aggressive, illegal behavior, which aims at nothing short than destroying the very fundamentals of today's international rules-based order. There is some logic, there is some calculus behind Russia's behavior. The problem of Russia today is its leaders, and to some degree also of its population's frustration, stemming from the fact that Russia is simply lagging behind. It's underdeveloped, it cannot compete in the way we are used to compete and act. And this is also what Russia is trying and seeking to destroy. It is the rules, norms, and principles. And there's one simple reason, as I see it, why Russia does it. It is a way for Russia, in this way, in this manner, to compensate for its weaknesses. Simply, this is a strategy of getting rid of the rules which do not allow for this moment Russia to be competitive and to be successful. And that's what we shall have in mind when tailoring our response to what we see, what we saw in Georgia, then what we saw in Syria with the use of chemical weapons by Russia's closest ally, Mr. Assad, then what we saw in Crimea, then what we saw in Donbass, then what we saw in Syria once again, and which continued with the meddling in democratic processes, including elections all around the globe, at least its western part, what we are facing now with the Skripal case, etc., etc., etc. Of course, I do not know the cure. I have no recipe, as my Lithuanian colleague correctly said. This will be a difficult task to do with this strategic challenge. But I think some good things are already on the track. They are already being done. Sanctions, fantastic thing. I think without sanctions, the Russian tanks would have now, for this moment already, have been on the Romanian borders, and who knows whether there would be Ukraine at all, without Ukrainians resisting to Russia's aggression, and without the West coming with sanctions and credibly communicating that there will be further sanctions if there is further advance. Generally, yes, Mr. Putin may be aggressive, he is aggressive, he may behave like a bandit, he may behave like a criminal, but he is not irrational at this moment. There is some logic, there is some calculus. And he was allowed to go that far as he actually did, just because there was no response. So our response should be based on increasing the costs Russia will bear if and when continuing this kind of behavior, which, as I already said, aims at destroying the very fundamentals of rules-based world order. That would be maybe my initial remark, and we will see how it continues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last panelist is Jonáš Syrovátka, and because he done quite extensive research on influence of disinformation during the Czech elections, so I would like to ask him to present some key findings. Yeah, because as already Mr. Bžoch said, sometimes it's hard to say what is the fake news, and the term is somehow somewhat overused, you know, like if you read Twitter of American president, you know, it's full of it, you know. It obviously means something a little bit different than we around this table. So Jonáš, for ourselves.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the invitation to this event, and maybe just at the beginning a few words about my organization. I represent the Prague Security Studies Institute, which is the think tank dealing with the security-related issues based in Prague, established 2002. And let's say my responsibility, as was already mentioned, is dealing mainly with the project focused on disinformation and strategic communication. In other words, to respond the question from the distinguished member of Czech Parliament, I am the one who is deciding what is fake news and what is not fake news.
There you go.
Well,
maybe I will, if moderator doesn't mind, I will, let's say, move a bit from the Czech election, and I will kind of start with initial remark, and if if you will be interested, I will speak more about the Czech election. But I think that, but I would argue that this topic is not as much connected as with the topic of this panel as it might seem from the first sight. So the initial remarks. Maybe I think I would like to, let's say, assess the position of the Czech Republic, because I think that it's fair to ask at the beginning, why should we really care about Russian assertiveness? We are not Georgia, we are in NATO, we are in EU, we are not in the Baltic states, so we don't have the border with Russia. So why should we really care? What's the problem? And I, unfortunately, since I'm the last panelist, Mr. Scheer already gave the answer. Because we see nowadays that Russia is a kind of a challenger of the international order, but we shouldn't forget that this international order is not challenged only by Russia, but also by China. So if we look at it from the, let's say, geopolitical perspective, we can see that this liberal national order that was established in the 90s and from which Czech Republic benefited greatly in many aspects, starting from economical and in social, let's say, is challenged nowadays. And that means for us, I think that should be the fact that there is certain assertiveness for certain powers that kind of want to reshape the geopolitical order which is functioning nowadays. Shouldn't be, let's say, the conclusion, but it should be the starting point for us. And from this assumption, we should start build up a specific recommendation and to have the debate what to do with that actually. And I would allow myself to have few observations that can be further discussed and developed through this panel. And I would argue that the first thing we have to do is start to think again about the security, kind of to understand that nowadays the power and the strength is coming back to the international relations, and to kind of stop dreaming the dream that kind of the democracies will spill over instantly through the whole world, and we have to, let's say, proactively contribute to this development, or we have to defend what was achieved in this miraculous 90s. And how to do it? So firstly, I would suggest that the first thing we have to do is, since the power is coming back to the international relations, we have to understand that the power can have also implications in all various spheres about which we didn't thought about in this respect. We have to think about that. Let's say the power struggle can be present in the information space in the form of disinformation, can be present in economy in the various ways. For example, when we are talking about the state capture, about the losing of control, about the strategic companies and so on, can be present in energy, can be present in the cyberspace, and so on. So we have to understand that security is present in all areas, and the state should be aware of this fact. Well, in order to be effective in preserve a secure environment for its citizens, again we have to build up new institutions. I can name one example in Czech Republic when it comes to information security, which is like the Center Against Terrorism and Hybrid Threats, which is kind of, I think, great example of the way how to, let's say, make clear that we are interested about the defense and building resilience in the information space. And when I speak about resilience, we should understand this term in the very broader term that is understood now. We cannot divide, let's say, the responsibilities from protection of our countries only from the ordinary citizen. We cannot say, okay, we have an army, private army, we are paying our taxes, so we don't have to care anymore, but we have to actively involve and engage citizens into this whole debate about the security of the country and about the measures that are that are prepared. Yes, and maybe, and again, this all which is rather internal has to be kind of reflected also in the way how we conduct our foreign policy, and once again kind of re-evaluate what actually are our priorities in EU and NATO, and again re-evaluate what are actually our goals in relation with Russia and especially Russian neighbors. So I apologize that I didn't answer the question, but I hope that those opening remarks were sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, I saw the first question from the audience, so I have some other questions prepared, but okay, let's give the floor to you. So Martin Swarovski, Czech Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you. Should I use mic or? No. Okay, I have one remark to what has been said by Mr. Bžoch here. You said that we need a dialogue with Russia. I'm fine with that. Completely agree. And you said also that Russians seem not to care much about criticism and about measures like expulsion of the agents. This is clear, and it is no wonder that they do not care, because these measures are not strategic ones. So you, I think, need to bring them into a situation when they really care. What they care about, for instance, is strategic investments, right? And I mention it because I was posted 4 years in Poland and 4 years in Hungary. Most of the time, there was an administration very receptive to Russian counterparts. Socialist government in Hungary, 2002-2006, was very much receptive to Russian investment, warming up relations, and the influence of Russia was rising up to a certain level. When the administration of Hungary, comprehend, it reached a strategic level. And then the government, no matter they were receptive to Russian counterparts, did the measures that they kicked off Russians from free strategic investments. Gas division of MOL, Malev and airport, and then prolongation of the power plant company Paksh. The same as Poland. I was there in time of warming up relations between Poland and Russia, 2009, 2012. So they established a lot of forums, the dialogue, different forums, paid from either Polish or Russian side, very receptive to Russian states and diplomacy, warming up all kind of measures. And then, again, it reached a level when they need to decide whether they leave Russians to privatize or to buy a refinery in Gdansk. And they said this is already strategic level, and they did not allow them, which was the start of the declining this warming. And you are now in the same situation here. I have no problem with someone that is more inclining towards Russia, and I have no problem that Russia is trying to cast influence here, which is a normal thing. But now you are ahead of strategic decision. I mean, Dukovany. And you need to come together, different political parties, and you need to define whether it is a really strategic thing. And if you do, I assure you they will care. It's now up to you.
Okay, thanks. And I will just add for the non-Czech members of audience that we are talking about enlargement of nuclear plant here in Czech Republic, and it's really an issue because, as already Martin mentioned, the Hungarian case shows that if you will just depend on the Rosatom, the Russian company, the results can be quite unpleasant, to put it mildly. But okay, I'm just a moderator, so I'm just giving a mic to Mr.
Thanks for that. I knew from the beginning where you're aiming, and I agree with that. I agree with that. This is I think that this is going to be the toughest political decision here in Czech Republic. As you already mentioned, Dukovany, and I definitely agree on that. What I would like to say also that we as not just Czech Republic, but we joined them as a European Union and European countries, we already started to showing Russia that this is enough with sending back those agents, and I'm pretty sure that all the countries, when we send back home, they call diplomats, they all know who we are talking about, that we made altogether big damage to their agents' networks here in Europe. So I think that it was a first really good step towards Russia to see, hey, this is enough. I totally agree with you mentioned that the strategic part of it is also the investments and letting them earn the money on our countries. So I totally agree with that. I'm afraid that I'm the really little one who can make anything with that, but yeah, I agree with that. You're totally right.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you very much for this comment. And if you go a little bit further from just one Czech example to the rest of it in exactly the same direction, I think all the answers are there to the question that you were asking about this perception, let's say, that is in the Czech Republic or in other countries of Central Europe, that Russia is far away, you don't border them, well, they're not going to come with the tanks here tomorrow because there are other countries they need to go through with the tanks before they approach Czech Republic, so why should we care? And where is the danger, and what's the problem? Well, there are a number of answers to this question. Strategic objects is obviously one, but even bigger is obviously with disinformation campaigns, with manipulation during the elections or during the polls or referendums, like we saw in Macedonia recently. Obviously, Russian goals are very diverse. To bring political power, Russia influenced political power in those countries that they traditionally considered, traditionally in the 19th century, obviously, considered as their own domain, and they lost to NATO, to European Union, with the aim of, first of all, and I think more importantly than their economic strategic interests, to undermine democratic institutions. I believe that that's the #1 goal for Kremlin, to undermine all the values liberal democracies were based on, to undermine institutions, to undermine the rules that we were talking here about, the international order that is there after the Second World War, and even more after the Berlin Wall falls down. And then starting from there, obviously, the economic and strategic interests come in a row, not on the last place, obviously, but I think that more importantly, their goal, meddling in US elections, meddling in French elections, meddling in Netherlands elections, obviously in this country we see the results, successful results, unfortunately. We just saw over the last weekend in Latvia the problems they created in a country which is teaching the rest of the world strategic communication and fight against disinformation. They've got the results of exactly opposite nature in their own country. And that's where we see the assertiveness of Kremlin power, that they have a plan. And I don't think that there is no plan. I believe that there is a very strong, clear plan, which is developed in zillions of institutions and research centers that were there already during the Soviet Union, are still there and continue working, and were created during Putin's times even more, and got more funding and more capabilities than they had during Soviet Union. Nothing we are seeing today is news, at least for us. I don't know, you said that there was no fake news before. I don't know how it was in Czech Republic, I'm definitely no expert to it, but there was fake news in the Soviet Union. And it was the only news in the Soviet Union. There was only one channel, only one Vremya, which was the news program, and that was it, end of the story. That was both fake news and the ultimate truth at the same time. There was nothing else. We could not watch anything else. I remember as a kid, I was 10, probably 11 years old, we would go up in the mountains on the hills of the capital city to listen to radio, to Voice of America, because that was the only thing. Well, obviously, 10 years I was not interested. My parents would go there, and Eventually, I was part of this gang as well, and listening to something that I could not understand at that time. So it's a very well developed strategy or action plan or whatever tactics, whatever you want to call it, of Kremlin since day one of the creation of the Soviet Union. You probably all remember the story with AIDS. How Indian newspaper wrote an article about AIDS being developed by American soldiers brought to the rest of the world and Asia, and then this article disappeared in the Indian newspaper, but it was reproduced by 84 countries all over the world, and then eventually after 4 years reached prestigious and respectable news outlets as well. And it was during the Soviet times, in the 60s, not like now when we talk so much about the post-truth world. I think, and I'm finishing with this, the response from the liberal democratic world, if it still exists, and if it's not already politically dominated by the pro-Russian political forces across the NATO and EU member countries, have lots of choices in front of them to prove to Russia that they are in charge and Russia is not making decisions for them. Yes, strategic objects, strategic interests, critical infrastructure is a big part of the deal. But there is even bigger political decision making which needs to be at place regardless of what Kremlin says, what Kremlin thinks, what Kremlin wants and demands from them. Well, of course I come from Georgia. Of course for me my country's interests come first when I talk about these issues. As well as for anybody in any country in the world and any citizen in the world, their country's interests will come first. But I strongly believe that not only because I'm Georgian, but because of everything that was happening around about Georgia, both from Russia and from NATO, having Georgia join NATO will be one of those political responses that proves and shows to Russia what every single leader of NATO member countries and NATO leadership itself says, that it is up to the decision of NATO and its members, and no one else has a veto power other than the members of NATO and the NATO as an organization itself. These kind of bold moves are the only actions that Russia really would care. I don't believe that the world is ready to bomb Moscow as they did in Belgrade. And I believe you don't believe in it either, and none of us wants to see that. We don't want to see Third World War out there in front of us and involving another disaster in the world. But at the same time, making bold moves that will prove to Moscow that deterrence is there and it's clear and it's strong, and NATO and European Union and the United States for that matter are ready to stand for their own decision, for their own legitimacy. 10 years ago, Georgia was told officially on paper, on record, that we will become members of NATO. Exactly 10 years ago. Exactly 10 years ago, or 4 months after that decision, there was a war in Georgia. And that war was not 4 months after Bucharest summit, but it was 3 months before NATO ministerial, which was going to give a map to Georgia. It was preventing advance of Georgia upon the decision of NATO. So it's been 10 years. Every time, every ministerial, every NATO summit goes by with exactly the same wording, confirming NATO's commitment and obligation to Georgia and Ukraine for that matter, and saying that they will stick to their position. But there is a big elephant in the room which made sure that this decision is not met. Now, this elephant needs to be kicked out of the room. That's why I believe it's not just our egoistic Georgia vision that at this very particular moment, on this very particular issue, Georgia might be one of those solutions, one of those recipes that we were talking here about, but objectively speaking, it will save NATO's legitimacy. It will prove that they can keep up with their promises. And no, I don't believe Moscow is ready to fight NATO in Tbilisi just because NATO will decide to have us on board. And as long as NATO proves that they are scared of it, they will be always in the response mode.
Like answer, somebody told that Salisbury scandal and, for example, the scandal in Netherlands, it's not connection with Russian youth and Russian citizens. I agree with this, and it's not a problem for Russian authorities because, for example, now our discussion in social media news more popular that scandal with a football match and with, for example, fighting between McGregor and Khabib. It's more popular in Russia than discussion about spy, discussion about Salisbury, and maybe it's not easy way to understand. The scandal helps our authorities to be stronger. Have an example. Do you remember the Salisbury scandal was before the election? And this day I was arrested and I sit in prison and I speak with a policeman. Okay, hey guys, I don't support Putin, I will vote for him. Well, why? Why you do this? Women told me, oh, we have a lot of enemies and the enemies attack us and I support cool guy Putin. So in this situation, any scandal, any new sanction, help authorities told that, oh, we live, our economy is bad, we have a problem in any infrastructure, any problems, but in connection because we have a lot of enemies. England, European Union, USA, any countries. So in my point of view, you ask what we have to do. Have an idea. I think it's help us to be it help us. For example, you have a lot of Russian propagandists, a lot of Russian businessmen, top managers, guys from authorities who have families, flats, enterprises in Europe. For example, the first guy from Russian propaganda who speak every Sunday, let's go to Tbilisi, let's go to Kiev, let's fight with everything, have a flat in Nice, in Italy. Solovyov, yes, he have a lot of money in European banks. They have holidays in USA, they have visas, they have a business. So it's easy way. You will attack Europe on Russian TV, you will increase ratings of aggressive propaganda, and then you go to the Europe and have your medical care, they have your banks, you have, for example, securities. And my point of view, the best way for European politicians, American politicians, is no tolerance for our aggressive guys, zero tolerance for the guys who, for example, who take our money, would like to. This is a way. For example, we have a governor who absolutely damage our medicine care in, for example, our region, and then they go to the France and have a Medicare of France. Why? Why you speak with these guys like normal person? In my point of view, the best way for us to create a problem for these guys. Okay, you are Russian aggressive propagandist. You don't like Europe. Please live in Moscow. For them, it may be big problem, and it really help us. For example, to have a. It will help us to have это позволит нам нормализовать ситуацию. Yes. And I think it's the best way for European politicians, and in my point of view, it's better way than sectoral sanction. Individual sanction for all the guys who create aggressive and democratic ideas have to be blocked for the European and other countries.
Okay, thank you very much. It's actually a fascinating question because actually, like a couple of years ago, lots of people in Daniel Fried, who is actually architecture of the
Sanction man.
Mr. Sanctions, spoke well, okay, if we will sanction the big oligarchs, the rich guys, there will be pressure on the Kremlin regime to change the behavior. But the others are saying, well, it's nonsense because oligarchs, just name it, they are not independent, and it's hard to say whether this sort of sanctions. I mean, Solovyov, okay, he will not visit Italy, he will go instead of, I don't know, to Altai or wherever, but I'm not not sure if it will change the content of his programming, which is really root and so on. And maybe it will just other person will come. Yeah, I will just give you a mic to direct. I would like also ask also other panelists because we already mentioned the economics and the Russian economic actors as a sort of weapon. I think that Lithuania, for example, have long-term experience with the Gazprom, let's say, and all the energetics. So if someone else would like to react on that as well. So, but first, Andrey.
I agree with you because, as you remember, for example, first 10 years of the Putin's it's like security for the business. They increase his money, they increase his enterprises, and it was good. And now we have to create a situation when Putin, as a president of Russia, is danger. It's a danger for the business. And for example, of course, we talk about Deripaska and others. For example, okay, they have money, but they'd like to earn money in Russia and live in Europe. Okay, let's create another situation. You earn money in Russia and please live in Russia. And nobody wants to do this because of, for example, now you are oligarch, you have a lot of money, but tomorrow you have a problem with authorities and all your money, for example, captured by authorities, no guarantee. And in this situation, our top leaders, our top managers have to understand that this situation not guaranteed for them, and they are supporters of authorities. But I hope in some situations they understand the situation change, and we have a problem, conflict of elite. I hope of this. But what they need a conflict, for example, if you can go away in Europe and live in its, I think it's a chance for the change situation in Russia.
Yes, thank you. Yes, indeed, Lithuania has a lot of experience coping with Gazprom and trying to find the solutions. And actually, we managed to find a solution because some years ago we were paying the highest price in Europe for the gas, for the supply of gas, because we didn't have any other option. So we were paying higher price than Germany was paying, although Germany is much further from Russia than Lithuania. And what we did is we built the LNG terminal. And when we built the LNG terminal, the situation has changed because we have another option. So Russian gas magically dropped the price. So, I mean, it's possible now to buy also Russian gas, but it's also possible to buy the LNG gas, which gives you a power of choice and a power in the negotiation process. What I wanted also to say that finding this kind of solutions is also a matter of political will, because in some cases it can cost a lot in terms of finances, but just you have to make a decision in some cases. What I would notice as that we managed not that well the situation, also coming back to the question of the NPPs being developed in the region by Rosatom, is that Lithuania had to give up the nuclear power plant according to the agreement with the European Union when we were entering the European Union. And then we had a project to build a new nuclear power plant with Hitachi, a project which we were aiming to develop. And Russia at the same time was saying that, claiming that they would be developing two projects, one in Belarus, Astravets power plant, and the other in Kaliningrad. And the one in Kaliningrad they suspended to some point, and it's not being developed at this moment. But Astravets power plant, which is in Belarus, is being developed by Rosatom, where Russian money is being invested as a loan, and where they are investing into the project, which is gravely dangerous and which is 40 kilometers from Vilnius, from the capital. As the Lithuanian power plant project has been cancelled due to the referendum, in which also, if to take into account what we are discussing here, Russia had also their own role by playing the population and trying to impact the population and leveraging population by making them being opposed to the nuclear power plant, which could have been developed in Lithuania. In the result, the Belarus power plant is being developed, and if we had our power plant developed, most probably it could have been complicated for Russia as well, because there would be overflow of the electricity, and they would not be aiming to export the electricity to the European markets. So then we come to the other question, to the question of the synchronization, because Lithuanian electricity grids, they are being synchronized, and they are still synchronized with the former Soviet electricity circle. So for us, it's kind of, we are now desynchronizing in the process of this synchronization with the former Soviet circle, and we'd like to gain the access into the European circle, and this is what we are doing by building the bridges. But on the other hand, if we had our power plant built, most probably it could have been causing grave complications for Russian projects which were being developed on the border. So what I mean, coming back to the strategic projects which Russia is developing and into which it's investing high amounts of money, is that Russia is really capable, the regime, the Kremlin, is really capable to drop big finances when something is really important for them. Let's come back to Germany. Let's come back to Nord Stream 2, for instance, which is like a Trojan horse in the European Union system, which is kind of dividing our solidarity by saying that, okay, nothing personal, it's just business. And also what is important, that in nowadays economical structures and investment structures, it's possible to show that your money is coming not from Russia, but they are coming from somewhere else. And then you cannot even make a counter-claim in the court, or the third energy package maybe is not working anymore, because it's not actually, it's nothing related to the government. So, I mean, in this kind of case, we are getting into complicated situation, because the democratic world is acting according to the democratic rules, according to the rule of law, and Russia as a bandit is acting according to their own understanding of like, you know, a hooligan who is coming to the room and doing what wants to do, and actually, as it is not very comfortable for everybody, it's difficult to stop this hooligan. So, I mean, it's a complicated situation, and yes, we have to find a solution. And yes, maybe the acceptance of Georgia in the alliance could be, as you said, a strong statement. On the other hand, the deterrence works only when the calculations clearly show that if you cross the line again, that you would get the strong, how to say, strong reaction. So I think Russia is calculating really very well inside of itself, and the question, what are the calculations that they are thinking? So in regards of the Baltics, I think they have their calculations done, and and the deterrence so far works. But how it's going to develop further, it's a very strong, it's a difficult question actually to answer, because the worse it goes in Russia, the more they can be eager to go further. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, the challenge, to pose a challenge, they are posing a challenge to the European Union. It's just a matter of, I would not say a matter of question, but it's just, okay, it's just to challenge the strong alliance could be also interesting for the regime to do at some point. So that's why we need to invest a lot into the borders. That's the final statement.
Someone else?
Well, I would add something on energy, because again, I already mentioned at the very beginning that we have to understand even the economy. We have to understand even the spheres which we didn't perceive as a possible security-related spheres in the past. We have to start understanding them, and especially while dealing with authoritarian regimes, where it's very difficult to distinguish what is actually private and what is public, what can be utilized as an economic weapon, and so on. However, two remarks about the things or reactions to the things that were said by my predecessors. Firstly, we have to understand that it's not only about energy. Of course, energy is very, very significant, and of course, when it comes to Russia, very important way how to get a leverage. But it might be about number of other issues. I would remind, for example, the Kuka case in Germany. There was both the Chinese bought some technological company, and when the deal was signed, actually the German government found out that aside of plenty of other things, this company also developed some microchips into the American jets, the flight fighters. So there is plenty of other things which we could consider as strategic assets. And secondly, Russia is not only animal in the jungle, and I would argue not the biggest one. I think that when it comes to the economy, we have to focus very more on the China. It's very interesting what China is doing in the South Asia, and we see that basically there are countries forced to borrow money for infrastructure they don't need and will never use, and they pay it back to the Chinese companies that will build up this infrastructure and pay in extreme debt to China for another 50 years or so. It's kind of giving to the China vis-a-vis these countries very great leverage. But so the conclusion from that is that at the moment we have the debate about the so-called screening mechanism on the European Union level. It is something very similar to the CFIUS institution in the United States that can supervise the investments into the strategic sector and has the authority to stop the most extreme cases. And again, we are coming back to what was actually said in the question. We are again coming to the whole discussion about what is actually strategic and when actually the politics should really intervene.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. So, are there any questions from the audience?
Okay, I should introduce myself. My name is Jaroslav Bžoch, and I spent most of my life in the gas industry. And in the 90s, in the beginning, I was deputy minister for energy. During this period, I discovered one thing. I have a master plan for protection of the European Union against the blackmailing from the Russian gas side. It's very simple, it costs nothing. But But I certainly know that it's impossible to realize, to do it so. Because there are plenty of different interests in Europe which doesn't allow it and which covers and protects this Russian movements and this Russian behavior. I spoke with many people, let's say with Mr. Šefčovič in Brussels. He got some small influence when he heard it, and after that he stopped the talks. I sent it to Mr. Telička just 14 days ago. Be sure that I'm not so crazy daddy who's presenting something, let's say, a little bit strange. But I know now that there is no way to protect Europe against any kind of blackmailing from Russian gas. There is no way to do it. Because there are plenty of interest, not only from the side of Germany, Italy, of course, Austria and France. It's mainly in this case. But also owners of the pipelines like the Net4 Gas, like Europe, which is the name of this Slovak part of Transgas. Eurostream, thank you. And owners of the Yamol pipeline and the Opel pipeline, as well as, of course, this last one, this small Gazelle. All these pipelines are blocked in their capacity by the Russian contacts, long-term Russian contacts. It means that there is no way to transport any other gas, let's say via from the west to the east, up to the capacity which is free, and it's not so big capacity. And if I understood well to the European relations and the laws, the opening of the market based on the free access to the pipelines. And in this case, it's fully cancelled. It's impossible to do so. So if at first you start with very tough conditions of the European Union in the case of transport of gas, if you move the delivery points from the center of Europe to the borders, where are the measuring point on a very low level, you have the points of the Schengen entry, let's say, for gas. And in this moment, without any cost, but with exception to the cartridge of the interest rate and few paper, to change it, no one knows it. No one wants it because these owners of the pipelines will lose enormous amount of the profit and safety of profit, and the Germans should have the higher prices of the gas that we have. So it's for them it's unacceptable, and the rest is the same. So I want to say only, and I'm finishing now, that Europe is not the place for the big common projects. Unfortunately to say, unfortunately. And if they wish to do it, they have no, let's say, national level of efficiency in decisions. So that's all probably, and if there is one has interest about this project, it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. So another remark?
If I may, my name is Bartosz and I'm an economist. I'm pretty old already, so I have experience of Russian and communistic propaganda in Czechoslovakia. I left Czechoslovakia when I was only 27 and studied economics here in Prague. I got to Germany and worked for Americans. I taught them languages, and I taught them economics. And I watch this, what is happening here. So you discuss only one part of that, what is really happening. Russia is a world power, or acts as one world power. And therefore, it does the things that you have described. I cannot check all the single events that you have described, whether it's really so as you say or not. Most probably it is. But on the other side, if you look what USA as the second world power is doing, so you get a little bit different point of view. As you have known, I believe it was you who noticed China, or somewhere there somebody noticed China as a second. The problem is that we are Europeans, and we should forget about the bipolar world, that means black and white, Russia or United States. We should take care of ourselves. That means we should create United States of Europe and take care of ourselves completely. That means to have a common army that blocks or protects our outer borders, and inside we can have peace. And actually, if you look properly at the system, how it's organized in the United States, so actually they showed us that it's a system that we can copy. Whether Russia will then try to be friends with us as United Europe, or whether it will prefer China, I don't know. No chance. I cannot say it in advance. We also have the possibility, when being united as United Europe, we can join with USA, for example, and make a really transatlantic power. But it must be equal with equal. At the present time, we are not equal because we are simple, small states. Germany is about 1/4 of the United States. We are about 3% of it, or something like that. And now, please excuse me, just only one remark. I am not expert on the oil business, but when you have said that Germany should pay more for oil than somebody else, if I understood properly, less. Okay. Less than now. Okay, but it doesn't matter. Both is wrong. Yeah. Okay. More, because if we do go to one hotel and you are twice as rich as I am, you should pay twice as much for the same room. Yeah. But no, everybody will say it's nothing. Just I shouldn't go to the hotel because it's too expensive. So this is my remark to it. And one more kind of small criticism. This panel speaks only against Russia, and there is nobody who would be sort of protecting Russia, and Russia cannot protect itself. So this is a little bit of a problem. It's not equal. At least one person should be there who will do it, not me.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will just repeat that we probably should really distinguish between the Russia and the Kremlin. Anyway, is there, okay, there's another remark or question?
My name is Matis Vitak. I would like to ask a question. You all said that we are, as Europe, that we are reactive to Putin's steps. Do you have some ideas what we could do to be active? Mr. Pivovarov suggested this individual sanctions. Are there some other concrete steps we could do to swap the relation?
Okay, so we will start.
I don't think, as you speak without microphone, I can also speak, I think, without microphone. Okay. I will answer your question, the last question, with kind of responding to what the gentleman was talking about, the gas industry problems. Because you've talked about the blackmail by Russia and unavoidability of the blackmail by the Russia to Europe. With due respect, obviously, I totally disagree with this concept, because there is nothing Russia can blackmail anybody, because yes, they have gas, but you have money. And if you don't buy that gas, then there is no gas and there is no blackmail. So my answer to your question is, do 3 days without gas. Don't pay to Gazprom for 3 days, and we will see what happens. Obviously, that's figuratively speaking, but Russia should see that they need you more in this very particular case than you need them. Because yes, they have a product, but product has value only in case if there is someone to buy this product. Otherwise, the product does not have any value, and it doesn't make any sense whether you have gas or you don't have a gas. So I think that regardless of all pipeline projects and all the economic costs and all the bargains that are going on all around the world, and I do absolutely agree with everything you said in terms of the content of the problem. That is, again, this is why I speak so much about the political will shown by the liberal democratic world to Russia, that that's not business as usual. Because what we saw in 2008, there was a war with Georgia, they came, they ethnically cleansed the whole region, they bulldozed, literally speaking, bulldozed the whole Georgian villages. There is no single house left anymore. They built, instead of the Georgian villages, Russian military base there. We have 24,000 Russian soldiers on the Georgian grounds today in 3 military bases that they have in Georgia in the occupied territories. Yes, world was furious for a month. Then a little bit less furious for another 3 months, and then after the New Year's it was business as usual, as if nothing happened. And when we were telling to the rest of the world that Ukraine is coming next, everybody was making fun of the president we had at that time, which was not difficult to make fun of him, but still. On that very particular point, unfortunately, he proved to be right, and Ukraine was next. And now, to go to your comments about creating the United States of Europe and then having one army and all the concept that you've described, and obviously it's not the first time we hear this concept. In your conclusion that you will live in peace, I have a big problem with that. Because you will not, first of all, you will not live in peace. Just the fact that Germans and French are not fighting anymore and you and Poles are not fighting anymore and Hungarians or whomever, does not mean that you live in peace. Because just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, last week, 1 year ago, next week probably, hopefully not, but still, you have terrorist attacks. You have people dying in the capitals of the European Union countries attacked by the terrorists. There is no notion like that, that just because Europe will finally get to the point when you will become one state, have one army, one bank, one money, one everything, you will live in peace if you don't care about the rest of the world. The biggest mistake NATO is making today, and I'm sorry to say that, Greta, although I completely support the Eastern program that they started and having the Baltics and Poland stronger now, this is exactly the kind of a leadership that NATO needs to show to Russia all the time, and it was absolutely proper project. If you put the Iron Curtain now, put by NATO on its borders, saying that, well, don't come inside this Iron Curtain, but whatever happens outside this Iron Curtain, I don't care, they will come inside the Iron Curtain once they finish their job outside the Iron Curtain. It was just 40 years ago that you had, or 30 years ago, that you had a wall in the middle of Europe. And unfortunately, Putin's Russia is no different from Stalin's Russia. It's just a different world and different kind of warfare that we have now, and it's a different strength of Russia today than it was during Stalin's time. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that there is very small step that is dividing us, that is keeping us from exact behavior as we've seen during Stalin's Russia. And just my opinion about this notion that it's not Russia, it's Kremlin. Unfortunately, I disagree with this concept. I disagree not because I don't know that there are brilliant Russians like we have the panelists here and lots of the others from the liberal family who fight on a daily basis, who get arrested on a daily basis. Mr. Navalny was my classmate in the United States, so I know him even personally, not just from the news or from every other problem that he's facing constantly. But President Putin has popular legitimacy. Whether we like it or not, he has popular legitimacy from his people. It's not like there is this man alone getting crazy by himself and no one in Russia wants to have him as a president. Our fellow panelists from Russia also was saying that every single action from the West unites those forces in Russia even more than it strengthens Kremlin, because the Soviet propaganda about capitalist world fighting against the Soviet Union, they being in charge of all the troubles and all the hardnesses we had in the Soviet Union, is still there. And yes, this is very well known to us, those who lived and who were born and grew up in the Soviet Union. It is unifying the people, okay, big part, less big part, but enough number of people in Russia for Mr. Putin to keep safe and feel strong. And I do know that at least two things for fact, because of all the polls, the internationally are well known, and the one from the Levant organization as well, that majority of Russians, according to the polls, believe that #1 enemy for Russia is Georgia. Last year it has changed. Up to last year, up to 2016, from last year it's the US. #1 enemy was Georgia. It was the opinion poll, not made in Kremlin, but made among the population in Russia. And that Ukraine is no country. The second result of this opinion poll was there are no Belarusians and Ukrainian Russians and these kinds of Russians and those kinds of Russians. It's all one Russian territory and needs to be unified. So again, yes, I know that there are differently minded people in Russia. I know many of them. I have an honor of knowing them, but unfortunately that's not the critical mass necessary for changing the regime and for changing the situation there. And this is very worrisome. If we believe for ourselves that it's just Kremlin, I think we are in another extreme of a problem, that we don't understand that the severity of the problem actually that is there.
I would like to say a small remark. I have never said that Europe shouldn't care about the rest of the world.
No, you said that you will live in peace. And I said you will not live in peace. You said if there will be United States of Europe, we will live in peace. And I'm just contesting this idea.
First, I haven't said we will live in peace. I said we need the army that will protect the outer borders, which we now do not have. But actually, you say the same. You small countries say how much you must invest into the enforcement of the border. But Europe shouldn't do it. Can you explain me the difference? You want to invest into the border, and you say Europe shouldn't.
No, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying it's not a solution. I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should. You should not rely on Americans being policemen in Europe all the time and not being responsible for your own countries. Yes, you should. No doubt about it. Here I talk Trump. But still, yes. And we should not be sending more soldiers to Afghanistan, not being NATO member state, Georgia, then Czech Republic does. Yes. You should take responsibility of being NATO members. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying that it's no solution.
Also, the Americans are the biggest contributors.
And we are the second largest contributors.
Americans are the biggest contributors to the European security through the NATO. In NATO budget, Americans are making the biggest part, the biggest share of the budget. And American bases, which are in Germany, they are very big contributors.
I work there. You do not have to tell.
They are very big contributors to your security. So just a fact, simple fact, which is proving the realistic situation of the European security, which without Americans would be kind of complicated and tangible and vulnerable.
Especially now,
especially now,
you are even in bigger disaster.
And especially with the migration problems that we are facing, and terrorism, as you noticed, and all these kind of complications which we are going through. So, kind of the idea of the army, of the European army, is. Could be only possible if the European countries would be willing to invest into their security as much as the other countries are investing. As the other countries are investing, Americans are investing a lot into their security and military budgets. Russians are investing a lot. Chinese are investing a lot. Brits are investing a lot. And I'm sorry, but Germans, with all the respect, Germany, with all the respect, is lacking a lot even to reach the 2%.
So Europe is investing about 4 times more than Russia.
So you told about Russian budget. As I know that all our money for the military is secret ideas. You told some songs. It's not true.
And it does not stand for anything.
Secret all over the world.
Nobody knows I'm from Russia, and I don't know how much money we spend for the armor.
Okay, so maybe can I just return to the question that I really wanted to add something about Kremlin and non-Kremlin?
We can bring up the statistics.
I disagree with you, and maybe a historical example. You told about all the Russians support Putin. Of course, we have a lot of historical example. For example, Ceausescu. As I remember, 2 weeks before he was killed, we have a rating about 90% executed. Yes, 90%. Maybe it's a strange example, but maybe think about it. And
I like that example actually, especially
and it's strange for me about you talk about Georgia. I can't discuss about it. I don't know about this polls, but last ratings of Levada, 39% of the support Putin now. It's yesterday Levada polls. There is a two parts of the medal. One is dangerous. Usually when we have degrees of ratings, something happens. We have Crimea, we have Syria, we have another problem. I hope nothing happens, but it's time to think about it. And another part of the medal, in my point of view, last several years, history of Russia started to be faster. Nobody knows that something happens in 14th, when the Crimea happens. But nobody thinking that something happens in Ukraine. Nobody thinking about Syria. And history was faster. In my point of view, we have a new age of Russian history. In this year or next year, I'm not sure that it happens today, but it happens in a short period before this day. Maybe it's strange for you, but do you remember last elections in Vladivostok? It's for forest, that first time in history of Russia, for 15 years, our main party falls the government elections. It's only first situation. Of course, the guys who win is not opposition. It's similar politics who support Putin as is. But in many regions of Russia, citizens like to vote for anyone who are not Union Russia. It's a good chance for civil society of Russia. We will try to help any independent politician. But in this situation, I hope that European politicians and some other who are interested in Russia have to discuss, have to speak with any civil society in Russia. It's very important for us to have a connection because, for example, something happens in a year or 2 years. You have to understand that in Russia you have a young, new politician. Now it's a municipal deputy. Now it's a leader of the citizen groups. But maybe it's a new generation of Russian politics, and they have to connection with anyone in Europe politician, and you have to speak of that. And it's not a Putin supporters. It's like guys who like to live in Europe in Democratic Institute, like to be a partner of all the normal political party in Europe.
Thank you very much. And if there are any other questions, I would like to just ask. Okay. So
Thank you for listening to me. My name is Jaroslav. I'm a student from the University, and a very interesting topic was brought up right now about defense spending in the NATO. So I wanted to ask a question about this issue. So yes, defense is something that should be tackled with, but I haven't heard any of you mentioning anything about the cybersecurity of the European region, because traditional and conventional warfare, yes, it is popular and everything, but nowadays, some of the things have changed and even evolved, and I don't think that Russia nowadays would think of intervention by traditional means, but more towards cyber or economic means. So, what will
Okay, who is our expert on cybersecurity?
I'm not an expert of cyber, I'm not an expert of cyber, but yes, indeed, this question is very important, and this kind of potential threat is we are aware of this, and we are strengthening our cyber defense security systems, and we are, I cannot tell you exactly how much we are spending on it precisely, but what we are doing, we are trying to change the legislative system. We're actually finishing this in order to increase our cyber protection. Second thing that we are, and here it's the European Union initiatives are very good present through PESCO initiatives, through where, for instance, Lithuania is in the lead of the cyber rapid response group, which would help to counteract against cyber threats. We are also installing some structures which would technically counteract against cyber threats. And yes, it's cyber has to be a topic on the agenda all the time, and it has to be dealt with how to protect especially the strategic structures of the country, which are dealing with the information protection of the people, and which is dealing of the structures protecting the internet flows and etc. So yes, cyber is very much on the top of the agenda, and in the framework of NATO, cyber is being also very much on the agenda, and there are some measures taken for this kind of issue. So I think it's an important question that you have raised, and I think there are many things that have to be still done, because through cyber you can have a lot of damage done. If you switch off all the, let's say, traffic lights in Prague at once, immediately you have already a big chaos in which you can do something, what you want to do. So.
Yeah, but maybe I would only add that you don't have to switch the traffic lights to have a traffic chaos in Prague. But that's the other issue. I would only follow up on that. I see it as a great opportunity for small countries that would never ever would be able to have like capable all-time military. But in the case that we will focus on that area, and we try to invest into it and be like innovative, we can be, let's say, in the top. And I'm not saying that the Czech Republic is nowadays in this let's say in the top group. As far as I know, for example, there is a special center about the cybersecurity in Brno, and they are doing pretty decent job, and they have some successes too. So I'm very much hoping even the Czech Republic will improve in this area.
Okay, perfect. So I think that we are closing actually. So I would like to thank all the partners for a really interesting discussion, and of course I would like to thank you as an audience, because I understand that there is plenty of other things to do in such one of the last world evenings in Prague. So thank you, and so see you next time. Thank you once again.